Hi, I'm Rachel Lancaster, and this is the Magnificent Midlife podcast. This is where we celebrate women in midlife and beyond. We challenge the status quo and bash those negative stereotypes about being an older woman. We're not over the hill at 40, 50, 60. We're just getting started, and the world needs us now more than ever. I'll be talking all things midlife, about issues that matter, and sharing fabulous stories of amazing women doing very cool stuff. Now's our time. Hello, dear listener. You've got me today, and I'm recording this on World Menopause Day, and I have something very, very exciting to share. I have published my book. My book is live. If you've been listening to me on this podcast, you'll know it's been a bit of a labour of love. It's taken rather a long time. My procrastination muscle has been flexed throughout, but I published it just last week, so it's hot off the presses. It's currently only on Amazon, but it will be elsewhere soon. It just takes a little while for the publishing cogs to turn and get everything sorted and approved, but there is a Kindle version of it. There is a paperback that you can order. I had somebody trying to order it in Belgium and they couldn't, so it may not be available immediately in your market. But if you can't get hold of it, then just email me, rachel@magnificentmidlife.com, and I will move heaven and earth to get a copy to you, because I am so excited. Can you tell? I'm just a little bit excited about this, because on this World Menopause Day, which I see as a huge day for celebration, I didn't years and years ago, but I do now, I can finally call myself an author. As I said, if you've been listening for a while, you'll have shared this journey with me. So thank you for listening. So what I thought I would do is I thought I would read a little bit from my book. So I thought I'd give you a little bit of a taster. You know, I see midlife as so much more than just menopause, and I see it as a cake. And I would like menopause to just be one or two slices of your midlife cake. Unless, of course, you've already bought into, you know, my mad thinking that menopause is just amazing and wonderful, and then you can have as many slices of menopause in your midlife cake as you like. But if it's a bit shitty, as it is for many of us, then I just want it to be, you know, a little portion of your cake, and the rest you can have Black Forest Gatto or lemon drizzle or Victoria Sponge or whatever you want. So the book is about many things, but basically I pick apart all of the narratives that I hate about midlife, aging and menopause. I've done a lot of research about why, for example, British women report the worst symptoms of anywhere in the world. Instead of just saying we should all have HRT and it should be free, I want us to say, why is that? I want us to be curious about what is going on, for heaven's sake, because it doesn't make any sense to me. So that's why I've written the book. So I start off by picking apart narratives about menopause, but then about ageism and how Western countries in particular are particularly ageist, and particularly ageist towards women. And I found out why that is. So it's all right exciting, I think, anyway. So then I have a whole section on what I have learned to help you manage the messy stuff, manage the menopausal symptoms. And then we have a whole section on how to build your own magnificent midlife, which is based very much on the one-to-one mentoring that I do with my clients. So it's a tried and tested system, and I take you through it, right? And then you get the chance to start planning what it is that you want to do with your next chapter in your magnificent midlife. So I'm going to now read you a little bit from my book. There will be an audio book available very soon. It's already done. I did it before I published anything at all. Went in the studio, read my whole book. And that was a very fun thing to do. I really like that. If anybody ever wants me to read their book, just let me know. I'll read it. I like reading books. It's very fun. Out loud, I mean. I like reading books to myself as well, obviously. that will be available, but the publishing cogs are a little bit slower in the audiobook department, so hang on in there. I'm going to start with the introduction because that's a good place to start, isn't it? So yeah, here we go. Magnificent Midlife. Transform your middle years, menopause and beyond. This book does some serious rebranding of midlife and will do the same for you. You may be stuck in the messy middle or managing to push your way forward with grace and gumption, but there's a bigger purpose here too. The world needs to see us differently, no matter how we see ourselves. Without a shift in how society sees us, we'll be facing an uphill battle forever. Why do I want to rebrand midlife? How did I get so passionate about changing it? Life rarely works out as we plan, does it? It can throw quite a few curveballs at us. Early menopause at 41 was one of mine. It became the catalyst for a whole new life, much better than the one before. Looking back over a decade later, I wouldn't change what happened. This book and everything that's brought me to writing it wouldn't exist without the experience. Let me tell you where my magnificent midlife journey began and why I think rebranding midlife is so important. I always wanted a big family, at least 4 children. I made the mistake of falling for a man who wasn't so keen. It took me 7 years of persuading to be allowed to try for a baby. I probably should have got that straight before we got hitched. When a baby came along instantly, it took us both by surprise. No fertility problems then. When my son arrived, I knew immediately I wanted more. Sadly, his father was having none of it. There were many reasons why my first marriage broke down, and my desire for more children was definitely one of them. After we split, I tried to find a man to make babies with me. I was 35 and the clock was ticking. Turns out I wasn't very good at finding men I could bend to my will. I finally fell for a man who already had 3 children. He'd also had a vasectomy. After much reflection, we finally agreed it'd be wonderful to have a child together, and this amazing man agreed to reverse his vasectomy. We knew it might not work, but he was willing to give it a go. I was 41 by this stage, so before subjecting my beloved to the knife, it seemed wise to have a hormone test just to check everything was working on my side. I had no reason to think it wouldn't be. That's why I was in the doctor's office awaiting my results when the doctor turned to me and said, "Your test results show you've gone through menopause." Say what? "Your FSH levels are those of a post-menopausal woman." He repeated in a slightly different way, as if that made the blindest bit of difference. "You would be unable to conceive a child." Bomb dropped. I can't really remember what happened next. I found I tend to block out the details of unhappy events, which is probably a good thing. I left with a prescription for hormone replacement therapy, HRT, the one made from pregnant mare's urine, Premarin, the standard recommendation in the UK at that time. I guess he probably asked me if I'd stopped having periods. I hadn't even noticed. I'd recently left a job. I hadn't been very happy in my job and was feeling liberated and excited. I was also nervous about choosing to be without a job for the first time in my life. Perhaps it wasn't surprising I hadn't noticed my monthly cycle. I'd never been particularly in tune with it anyway. With hindsight, I came to learn that was probably part of the problem. Just as when you go on holiday and suddenly get sick, stepping off the stressful corporate hamster wheel allowed my body to say, "I can't keep this show on the road anymore." Hello, early menopause. I remember feeling life had taken a nasty nosedive. Everything was a blur for quite some time. I didn't fill the HRT prescription. I sat on it for another 3 years. I came away knowing nothing about why this had happened to me, how to take care of myself, nor what it meant for me to be post-menopausal, a whole flippin' decade early. Knowing what I know now, I think the information and care given to me was woeful. The grief came instantly, like a tidal wave. Grief for the child I was never going to have. I knew I was optimistic to expect to get pregnant at 41. I wasn't stupid. It had been the last roll of the dice, so to speak. Getting a diagnosis of early menopause was something else completely. I sank for a time into real despair. My lifelong dream to have a second child was gone. In addition, there was the realization that, according to society or the narrative inside my head, I was now a shriveled up old prune. No one had actually told me that. I came to that conclusion by myself. I had succumbed to decades of relentless messaging. Older women were insignificant. In my head, my lack of fertility meant I'd instantly lost my looks, value and relevance, and I was destined to life, relegated to the back. Dismissed. I'm a natural researcher, and digging around I found information, or at least where to go to get information. It wasn't easy, which is why I later created the resources I couldn't find. I discovered the Daisy Network. They were a fantastic resource, and when I discovered their annual conference, I was there like a shot. That event was a real eye-opener and quickly shifted me out of self-pity. I felt such a fraud. I already had one child. Most of the women there had gone through menopause significantly earlier. They'd never been able to have children at all. Some had accepted a childless life, some adopted, some conceived using donated eggs. I briefly considered that last option, but we already had 3 children whose father was my partner and the mother someone other than me. And I realised how lucky I was. The event introduced me to 2 people who would play an important part in my menopause journey, Dr. Nick Panet and Dr. Marilyn Glenville. I asked for a referral to Dr. Panet a few years later when I finally went on HRT. He was the top man in the UK specialising in early menopause. He and his team were brilliant. Dr. Glenville was transformational because for a time I got my periods back. Yes, really. It became the formative first step on my journey of discovering just how important diet and lifestyle are in creating and maintaining hormonal balance. I learned that we never have to accept the status quo when it comes to our hormones. Dr. Glenville suggested there was much she could do to help women struggling with early menopause and infertility. She was crystal clear about my prospects. No guarantees, but if I signed up to her advice for 3 months, there was a chance I could get my hormones back to premenopausal levels. She told me to cut out alcohol, caffeine, dairy products and added sugar. I was to eat only organic produce. I should also try to use cosmetic products that were as natural and non-toxic as possible. She wanted me to have a small protein snack every 3 hours to keep my blood sugar levels stable. Within 5 weeks, I had a period. Incredible. I couldn't believe it. From a diagnosis of having gone through menopause, I was now once again bleeding. I had another hormone test, and this doctor said he saw no reason why I couldn't conceive. The love of my life went for the reverse vasectomy, but it didn't work. 9 months later, my periods disappeared again, and another hormone test confirmed I was back to my postmenopausal hormone levels. It was all very confusing. I now know that hormone fluctuations during our 40s are not abnormal, although it was still rather early for it to be happening to me. I just wish the doctors I saw then had known that too. I also now know menopause is a tiny fraction of a doctor's medical education, with diet being only just slightly more. I now believe my initial diagnosis was most probably wrong. I was in perimenopause rather than definitively through menopause. Our hormone levels fluctuate enormously during the perimenopause years, that period of time leading up to menopause. Technically, you are in menopause when you have had no periods for a year if you're over 50 and 2 years if you're under 50. So menopause itself is just a moment in time. I certainly hadn't been without a bleed for 2 years, and if I'd had the hormone test on another day, the results could have been completely different. Turning around the diagnosis and getting my period back taught me the impact of diet, lifestyle and mindset in midlife. I'd been running on empty for a long time and living a very stressful and unhappy work life. Falling in love again, while a wonderful thing, is still a stress on the body. I have no doubt the years spent in a highly stressful environment contributed to my hormones going haywire at 41 when I stepped off the hamster wheel. My emotional reaction to what happened made the experience much worse. Thankfully, I eventually figured out I was no less of a woman because I'd supposedly gone through menopause. Stress messes with our adrenal gland function in particular and our hormones in general. Consider women who finally give up trying to conceive after infertility, adopt and then conceive naturally. How we respond to our environment and the pressure we put ourselves under both impact our hormonal health. It wasn't until the early menopause diagnosis that I started to consider all of this in any meaningful way. We'll be looking at the many ways to get better hormonal balance through perimenopause and beyond in this book. My period disappeared again after 9 months. Apparently it wasn't unusual for the body to revert to its original plan, even though it had been possible to kickstart it back to fertility. I wonder, looking back, if it wasn't also because I reverted to my old habits food-wise, including alcohol and sugar. We'll never know. What I hope you'll learn from my story is that evidence of hormonal changes is often what makes us realise we're in midlife. These changes kickstart a period of intense transformation for which we're usually completely unprepared. Hormonal changes and menopause itself can happen a lot earlier than we expect. Our hormones can fluctuate wildly during our perimenopause years. What we eat and drink and how we live impacts our hormones massively. There is much we can do to improve our own hormonal health. It pays to stay curious and challenge what you're told, even by a doctor. The period of midlife and menopause is not the end of meaningful life. Rather, it's an exciting new transition if we choose to embrace it as such. Without having experienced the early menopause diagnosis, my life would be very different. I'm grateful to it for spearheading a completely different and far more fulfilling life, and for teaching me how women can age when we don't accept the nasty narratives we grow up with. As often happens in life, something bad can produce something magnificent. I now view early menopause as a gift. Without it, I wouldn't be the woman I am today. It prompted me to reevaluate everything about getting older as a woman, to question all those negative ageist and sexist narratives and stereotypes, and to challenge the accepted status quo like a banshee. I want you to feel the power of this time of life too. So there you go. That's a little sample from just the introduction. So I've only got to page 9. There's over 200 pages. So there's lots and lots of meaty, juicy stuff in this book. I'm very proud of it, actually. I've packed a lot in. I've written a whole chapter on how we might go about rebranding menopause. So I'd just like to read a little bit more from that. As with aging in general, culture matters massively when it comes to how we understand, approach and experience menopause. It's not just a physical experience, as we'll explore later. And how we each experience menopause is unique, dependent on many factors, including geography. I find it fascinating that women in Western English-speaking cultures, where I've noticed the most ageism, appear to report the most angst about menopause and the worst menopause-related issues. One study found that British women reported the very worst symptoms. It may be that symptoms experienced during the menopausal transition arise through a complexity of factors and not simply declining levels of estrogen. Ethnicity, geographic location, stress, local culture and age are factors that also need to be taken into account. If we take a quick gander through the experience of other cultures, we see how there is often a correlation between how aging in general is perceived and women's experience of menopause. In China, menopause is called a woman's second spring, and anecdotal evidence suggests menopause is less of an issue for women in China. Obviously, there are lots of aspects to consider, such as how taboo the subject is, diet, body weight, environment, levels of exercise, and so on, which we'll discuss later. But I fundamentally believe that if we don't fear getting older so much, we will also feel less fear around menopause. And if we don't fear menopause, our experience of it can often be easier. We may even look forward to the time when we're no longer a slave to estrogen, which has made us want to nurture everyone except ourselves, as we wave a fond goodbye to the emotional roller coaster of our menstrual cycle. That is my hope for women. If I were a Native American, I'd have likely viewed the menopausal transition as a neutral or positive experience as I moved to becoming a woman of wisdom in my community. Many women in cultures where aging is viewed more positively, or where lack of fertility can be viewed in terms of greater freedom, report few menopausal issues, simply a cessation of periods. Our personal attitude towards menopause has a significant role in our overall experience of it. We'll look elsewhere at the power of the mind, but starting with the very transition of menopause, what we believe will be often will be. Our expectations can become self-fulfilling prophecies. Women who have negative attitudes towards menopause and or aging are more likely to report a greater number and frequency of menopausal symptoms. Western societies, which do not necessarily prioritise procreation, still often place a high value on youthfulness. In these societies, menopause signals loss of youth combined with a perceived loss of sexual attractiveness, and this perception can lead to negative attitudes towards the transition. We also medicalise menopause, with much of our associated language being negative, such as reproductive or ovarian failure. Words matter enormously, as we're discovering. Much of what we believe in the West about the negative aspects of menopause and so-called hormone deficiency stems from a book published in 1966 by gynecologist Robert A. Wilson called Feminine Forever. In this best-selling book, Wilson maintained that menopause was a serious, painful and crippling estrogen deficiency disease that should be treated with estrogen replacement therapy to prevent the otherwise inevitable living decay. He promoted the use of a drug that healthy women would take every day for the rest of their lives so they could remain feminine forever. Wilson wrote, "All postmenopausal women are castrates. With HRT, a woman's breasts and genital organs will not shrivel. She will be much more attractive to live with and will not become dull and unattractive." I believe misogyny and patriarchy were at the core of this argument. It was necessary for the woman to remain feminine to please her man. And remaining feminine required hormone replacement forever. Robert Bazell, in an article on the NBC News website, notes that the most amusing section of this book describes a visit to Wilson's office from a prominent member of the Brooklyn underworld. The mobster is sick himself and has come for the doctor's help for his wife. "She's driving me nuts," the tough guy says. "She won't fix meals. She lets me get no sleep. She picks on me all the time." The visitor then displays a .32 automatic and tells Wilson, "If you don't cure her, I'll kill her." Wilson calmed the mobster. He accepted the wife as his patient and reported that she responded well to twice-a-week estrogen treatments. Her disposition improved noticeably after 3 weeks, and soon she was very busy taking care of her sick husband. No wonder estrogen has been described as the biddable hormone. Reporters from the New Republic and the Washington Post discovered documents revealing that Wilson, who died in 1981, received payment for the book and for speaking tours on its behalf from companies making HRT. Sales of HRT quadrupled in the years around the book's publication. When HRT became linked to breast cancer later on, women stopped using it in droves. Now that associated risk has been found to be much reduced, HRT is more popular again as a treatment to help with menopause-associated issues. There is no doubt HRT can help many women, but as I will show in the next chapter, there are many other more natural ways to help us transition. When I read of women again being advised to take HRT forever for long-term health, I can't help thinking that Wilson's book has had a lingering impact on how we as a society and individually view postmenopausal women. No one can claim that long-term use of HRT is completely safe, at least not for another 20 years. The HRT manufacturers must be delighted at the prospect of every woman taking their drug for life. As with the sales of anti-aging creams and hair dye, just imagine how much money that would involve. What if, instead of the misogynistic narrative that strikes fear in the hearts of women and our menfolk, there is actually an evolutionary reason for menopause that places women at the top of the totem pole of influence instead of sliding rapidly to the bottom? What if we can create a whole new narrative for this time in our lives? What if we start to see menopause as a gift that enables us to take stock of the lives we've lived and want to live, so we can let go of what no longer serves us while mining the diamonds to sustain us moving forward? What if menopause actually opens up a whole new world of possibility for you, rather than being an end of opportunity? So that's a little section from my chapter on rebranding menopause. And then I go on to Being More Whale, which, if you've listened to this podcast, you will have heard me talk about the impact of Darcy Steinke on me and her encounter with the whales. And if you haven't, go and find her podcast, because she made me cry on it. It was pretty amazing. So that is just a little introduction to my book. I really wanted to share it with you, and I'm excited. And it's today, the day that I'm recording it, is World Menopause Day. And that didn't exist when I started out on my journey 14 years ago. There was no such thing as National Menopause Day. So it's incredible that exists. And I'm also terribly excited that my book is ready in time for National Menopause Day. If you'd like to read it, I hope you would. I really hope you would like to read it. Just go and have a look on Amazon. Search for Magnificent Midlife. Transform your middle years, menopause and beyond. And it's not just about menopause, honestly. It is, think of my cake analogy that I started off with at the beginning. There is lots more. The whole, almost half the book is about planning your magnificent midlife and working out what you might want to do with your next chapter, because life is precious, isn't it? Absolutely precious. So happy World Menopause Day. Happy Menopause Awareness Month. And if you're listening to this in the future, I hope you are having a happy menopause. And do go and check out my book.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Magnificent Midlife podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe or follow, share it, and I'd love a 5-star review. It really helps other listeners find the podcast. You can find out more information about this episode in the show notes at magnificentmidlife.com. That's also where you can access one-to-one mentoring with me, my membership program, and other resources to help make your midlife magnificent. Make the most of your next chapter. Help me change the world, one magnificent midlife woman at a time.